you're absolutely right. It's not a straight line, and there were many hiccups and many problems along the way. And it's not surprising that Karl Marx penned his Communist Manifesto in 1848, which was really the peak of disruption of the first industrial revolution, and as you were going into the second industrial revolution. Essentially, everything around you was changing. Suddenly, peasants didn't know who the lord of the manor was anymore. Suddenly, craftsmen who were very proud of the job they were doing saw factories growing all around them. And they had a choice of either you're unemployed or you join the factory or somehow find a niche that you can be useful at. And the same applies to aristocracy. Suddenly, they found that they no longer have the same social position as they used to enjoy in the past. And that social position always came with responsibilities. It's not just you were the lord of the manor. There were certain responsibilities that you were obliged to have. And so all of that's become incredibly disruptive. And so when Luddites, were smashing looms, they were smashing looms not because they thought, oh my goodness, they're going to take our jobs. They were smashing looms because they understood that will denigrate their pride, their job, ultimately their freedom, ultimately their compensation, and everything else. And they were totally and completely correct. Now, a lot of people say, hey, it's all ended up okay. And one of the things I describe in the book, if you just gone into a time machine and you've gone into early 1800 London, and you were to tell Luddites, please don't smash anything. Believe me, in 30 or 40 years, it's all going to be okay. They will smash your head because the 30, 40 years was basically the entire life. And it is true, productivity started to improve. As you go into the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, productivity started to improve, real wages started to rise. And Marx was right at the back end of the first industrial revolution. He didn't live long enough to see disruption of the second industrial revolution. But then that came along, and the second industrial revolution had a much bigger waterfront, because the first industrial revolution is basically cotton, steam, railways. If you think of the second industrial revolution, chemical, pharmaceutical industry, combustion engine, electricity, refrigeration, much wider waterfront. And again, you had dislocations. Remember what we discussed as terrorists. That's back in 1870s, 1880s. They were bombing coffee shops. They were killing the Tsar of Russia. They were killing later on the President of the United States. And so again, it was another set of dislocations that occurred. And you could argue that the Long War, which is the First and the Second World War, was a back end of that dislocation of the second industrial age.
But Keynes had a lot to say about what was going on during that period. As the first industrial age had sort of passed, we were now in the beginning of the second industrial age. That's when Keynes was penning his missives about what to expect.
Yes. And Keynes, one of the things he was describing, what will happen if this continues? And if this continues, his view was in 4 generations, we will have nothing to do. In a sense, productivity eventually is going to be so high that basically we'll be liberated from the slavery of labor. And so the way I look at it, whether it was 1850s when Karl Marx was debating something very similar, because to Karl Marx, the idea of communism was not a totalitarian system, but rather a system of such a high productivity that basically you're liberated. You can do whatever you think is appropriate, from everyone according to his ability to everyone according to his needs. And if you think of Keynes in 1930, it's pretty much exactly the same idea. If you think of 1980s, 90s, a lot of people, including people like Peter Drucker, were debating very similar issue. What will happen if technology continues to move forward? As it continues to move forward, yes, there are disruptions. Yes, there are 40, 50, maybe 100 years of volatility. But at the end of that process, productivity, which used to be 10 bips for 1,000 years, which then rose to 100 bips after first industrial revolution, then rose to 200 bips after second. Now we're back down to below 100 bips in most places. That could mushroom to 500 bips. 600 bips, or maybe more. And if it does, at that point in time, there is a sort of liberation of labor that is going to occur. And so that's what we are facing. But the thing is, so there is a glorious outcome at the end of it. There is a glorious good thing at the end of that. But between here and now and that final destination lies pretty treacherous times, just like it was in the Karl Marx days. The way I look at it, when he was describing, lumpen proletariat, which is proletariat that lost his or her consciousness. They don't know what they are anymore. When he was describing bourgeoisie that was complete, an aristocracy that was completely disoriented, you can step back and say, well, it's exactly the same thing. They had factories. We have artificial intelligence and robotics. They used to have, aristocracy. We have our own aristocracy, and so it's exactly the same disintermediation, the same discontinuities. And the thing is that the interesting thing to me was that the next 20 or 30 years will, in my view, will be the peak of that disruption.